In 1913, Argentina was richer per person than Germany or France, rivaling Australia and Canada as a first world success story. Today it's defaulted on its debt 9 times, endured 5 hyperinflations and lost 99.99% of its currency's value. How does a nation squander that kind of head start, and could it happen elsewhere? The answer begins with the Golden Age and the fatal choice hiding just beneath its surface. In the first decades of the 20th century, Argentina stood at the pinnacle of global prosperity. Ships loaded with beef and grain departed daily from Buenos Aires, bound for the hungry markets of Europe. The Pampas, vast fertile plains stretching beyond the horizon, produced a bounty that seemed inexhaustible. British and European investors poured money into the country, financing an explosion of railroads that stitched together distant ranches, ports, and cities. By 1913, Argentina's per capita income matched that of France and Germany, and outpaced Italy and Spain. The capital, Buenos Aires, dazzled visitors with its grand boulevards, opera houses, and electric streetlights, earning its nickname Paris of South America. The numbers told a story of roaring growth. Between 1903 and 1913, Argentina's economy expanded at nearly 8% a year, with industry growing even faster. Gold reserves filled the vaults of the central bank, making up almost 4% of the world's total supply, even though the country produced only a fraction of global output. The liberal constitution adopted in 1853 protected property rights and encouraged immigration. Waves of newcomers arrived from Italy, Spain, and across Europe, drawn by the promise of land and opportunity. Commerce thrived and a confident middle class emerged, filling cafes and theatres with the energy of a society convinced its best days lay ahead. Yet beneath the surface, the engine of prosperity ran on a single fuel: exports. The good times rolled, but the foundations were narrow. For now, Argentina looked unstoppable, a nation that had transformed itself into a first-world powerhouse in a single generation. The prosperity of Argentina's early 20th century rested on a narrow base. Commodities, beef and grain, accounted for the overwhelming share of exports, making the country's fortunes rise and fall with global prices. The export elite, clustered in Buenos Aires and the Pampas, controlled vast tracts of land and shaped policy to favour their interests. Foreign credit, mostly from British and French banks, fueled the construction of railroads, ports and grand public works. But these flows came with strings attached. When world markets boomed, money and optimism flooded in. When prices dipped, credit tightened, and the entire system shuddered. The 1853 Constitution had promised modern institutions and protected property rights, but it did little to diversify the economy. Industrial development lagged behind, with most manufacturing limited to food processing or simple goods. Imports filled the gap: machinery, textiles, even basic consumer items. Argentina's middle class grew, but it depended on the continued success of the export model. Behind the glittering facade, the country was exposed, and a bad harvest or a distant financial panic could trigger a chain reaction. The government, addicted to foreign loans, had little fiscal room to maneuver. Each new project or expansion was funded by borrowing abroad, not by building a tax base at home. The legal framework encouraged investment, but failed to spread opportunity beyond the landed elite. This concentration of wealth and dependence on fickle foreign capital created a structural weakness. In good times, it was invisible. But when the world economy faltered, Argentina's vulnerability would be laid bare, not just in its markets, but in its politics. Before dawn on September 6, 1930, army garrisons in Buenos Aires mutinied, ignoring the orders of the democratically elected president Hipólito Yrigoyen. By sunrise, troops loyal to General José Félix Uriberu marched through the city, seizing government buildings and blocking key roads. The navy declared support for the rebels by evening. In a single day, 70 years of constitutional government ended. The president, isolated and under pressure, resigned the next morning as crowds filled the streets, some celebrating, some protesting. The coup did not come out of nowhere. Argentina was reeling from the global depression. Commodity prices had collapsed. Unemployment soared, and the political elite accused Irigoyen of incompetence and corruption. But until that morning, the rules of power had been clear. Governments changed at the ballot box, not by force. Uribaru's new regime justified its actions as a rescue operation. The military claimed the nation was in crisis, that old institutions had failed. Tanks rolled past the Casa Rosada, and soldiers patrolled the boulevards of a city that had once seen itself as a European capital. Within days, the army installed a government by decree. Elections were postponed, the press was censored. For the first time since 1853, Argentines learned that political power could be taken at gunpoint. The precedent was set. In the decades that followed, the military would return again and again, each intervention weakening the fragile idea that law, not force, should govern the nation. Juan Perón entered Argentina's political stage promising a new social contract. His vision was not just about lifting wages, but about redesigning the entire economic order. At its heart was a system where labour unions, especially the powerful General Confederation of Labour, became permanent partners of the state. Through a series of laws and decrees, wage bargaining moved from individual workplaces to national negotiating tables. By 1948, collective agreements were mandatory and unions gained monopoly rights to represent workers. The Ministry of Labour, chaired by Perón's allies, approved every deal, ensuring no agreement could be reached without government blessing. Employers were required to negotiate with union leaders, but the real power rested with the state and its labour partners. This new arrangement locked in rigid rules for hiring and firing. Dismissing a worker now required just cause, with severance payments stretching to a year or more of salary. For business owners, adding staff became a gamble. For unions, the system offered leverage as wage floors rose rapidly, often outpacing productivity. When employers resisted, the state stepped in, subsidizing wage hikes with public funds. IAPI, a state export agency, taxed rural producers and funneled the proceeds to urban workers through food and utility subsidies. By the early 1950s, up to 40% of the national budget went to support these programs. The government's finances could not keep up. With tax revenues lagging, deficits grew. The central bank printed money to fill the gap, fueling a steady rise in prices. Inflation became a permanent feature of Argentine life. Perón's blueprint, designed to redistribute wealth and guarantee social peace, instead hardwired a cycle of fiscal stress and political bargaining that would haunt the country for generations. By the late 1980s, Argentina's currency was worth less with every passing hour. Monthly inflation soared past 100%, then 200%. Shoppers raced through supermarkets, grabbing whatever they could before prices changed again. Workers lined up at banks the moment paychecks arrived, desperate to exchange pesos for US dollars. Savings accounts evaporated. In 1991, a new plan promised relief. The peso would be pegged 1-to-1 to the US dollar. For a brief moment, stability returned. Inflation collapsed to single digits, but the cost was steep. Factories shut down as an overvalued peso made exports uncompetitive. By 2001, the government's reserves were drained and foreign debt stood at $132 billion. Banks locked depositors out overnight, a policy known as the corralito. The peso crashed, losing 3/4 of its value in days. Unemployment hit 25%, poverty soared above half the population, and 5 presidents cycled through office in just 2 weeks. The social contract was shattered. 9 sovereign defaults. That is Argentina's record, more than any other advanced economy. In 2023, inflation reached 211%, the highest in the world outside failed states. 4 out of every 10 Argentines now live in poverty. The peso, once a symbol of stability, has lost 99.99% of its value against the dollar since 1983. Foreign reserves hover at critical lows, while the government owes the IMF $44 billion from repeated bailouts. In the face of collapse, a new administration has launched shock therapy reforms, slashing subsidies, devaluing the currency, and promising to balance the budget. But for millions of families, the crisis is not history, it is daily life, measured in shrinking paychecks and rising prices. Today, Argentina's crisis isn't just history, it is a warning. When institutions break down, even the richest societies can unravel. As inflation erases futures and trust collapses, the cost is measured in lost generations. No nation is immune. The world is watching which lesson Argentina chooses next.